My name is Shant-Knows-It-All, and though I am vociferous when I write, I must overcome a mental torment, a physical agony to read my own words out loud. I fear I won't have breath to finish. I fear no one will have the attention span to listen. And yet I find courage when I read essays, watch documentaries and debates, and my own thoughts are confirmed in the past that it is my moral obligation and responsibility to share. My petty protest. I always see news updates and wish I could go back in time to argue against some idiot who didn't get it and ram the newspaper, well, really the tab on my web browser on my laptop, or rip the 65-inch flat screen off my bedroom wall and shove the reporter talking into their face and say, "See, you idiot, what I tried to tell you?" But to be honest, I know that people never even remember shit I say. I, on the other hand, remember everything. And when the breaking news comes out, I know exactly who I want to go back and confront. I remember every fucking argument, and I've replayed them in my head over and over for years. A gift of my neuroses or genius. And this article stood out right away as I ruminated on all my annoyances about diversity I faced in tech companies, startups, and white corporate America in general. I thought about how I had to go to these Friday fire chats the CEO started at this one startup during the George Floyd upset in summer 2020. I had convinced the CEO to take my job out of New York and work from home in Charlotte, North Carolina, to be with my daughter. I had waited patiently for his decision, knowing that if I expressed how urgent the issue had become, that would only make him say no. I've learned that white folks become especially hardened if you show you really need something. Maybe that's a universal reaction to neediness. But nevertheless, I knew this man would be going against his core belief that people need to come into the office. I'll tell you how I manipulated him fully a little later. The CEO scheduled these optional meetings on Friday to discuss how racial tensions were affecting us all. But I knew these meetings weren't optional for me. I'm the only Black person whose ideas they must know. I'm the only one, when not in the office, who must participate to be a part of the team. Actually, I had not watched George Floyd die on a New York City block because I don't watch shit like that. I agree with Kanye West in some clip where he talks about how they constantly put those images, Black people being hosed and chased by dogs every Black History Month, to reprogram our hopelessness. Why watch this George Floyd clip when all these other Black folks were reporting they were so traumatized they couldn't think straight? 1, I gotta work with white folks every day. That's why you're not gonna catch me watching 12 Years a Slave on a Sunday night. 2, my mom has always been selective about what she chooses to watch and when. We could beg my mom to watch a new movie and she might just say, "No, my mind is not ready for that right now." I used to go to class with my mom and my favorite aunt to Housatonic Community College. My aunt taught me algebra at 6 and my mom read me Oedipus and the Odyssey. I visited the Breakers' mansions and sat on a bidet in Rhode Island. I boarded a submarine. I collected fossils in the Catskills. I'd been to Broadway and become accustomed to reasoning with adults. I was further cultured at an affluent college preparatory school in Connecticut. I visited the Met every year and dressed up to recreate Socrates choosing to take the poison. I learned French and ate escargot in a quaint French restaurant long before the CEO took us to a fancy restaurant for dinner. I knew how to use chopsticks, which is a skill I became very proud of. It seemed every new boss aimed to unnerve me by suggesting sushi on my first day of work. I've walked on the beaches of Martha's Vineyard, where presidents vacation. Once, on one of my solo travels about the vineyard, I sat on the floor in the aisle of a small indie movie theater. The movie was Rush Hour 2, a much anticipated sequel. I was invisible on the ground, like a fly on a white wall. The crowd was safe amongst their own on the vineyard. I got to see racism when it didn't have to be hidden. Jackie Chan told Chris Tucker he would smack him back to Africa, and the entire theater erupted in loud laughter that lasted so long I couldn't hear the next scene. I'm reminded of this when I hear Dave Chappelle tell Oprah about the time he realized the white execs weren't laughing with him, but at him. I was again reminded of their uninhibited laughter when I watched the debate of James Baldwin versus William F. Buckley. If the majority agreed with Buckley, Perhaps the standing ovation Baldwin received was just for show. Buckley dismissed the oppression of the black people by Baldwin's existence, but I, like Baldwin, am a token too. Now, let me brag a little more about my tokenism, possibly to my chagrin. I've played every sport from squash and lacrosse, and even the French game bocce. I've seen movies from all genres and all languages. I can name actors and unique camera shots from Soderbergh to Spike Lee. I've read infinite texts, my favorites from Dostoevsky to Sister Soldier. I was a first chair violinist and know every song in The Sound of Music and on DMX's first album. They do not know this when they look at me and my black face, thick body, and poor circumstance. They do not know that the first startup that I worked for after I left the Yale School of Medicine forgot that I was starting and no one was in the office when I arrived. They do not know that I was the only one who had to take a computer test during my interview and solved it so quickly to their surprise. They do not know that when they took me out for lunch after the interview walking back, I noticed that my car had been towed. When I found no one in the office to greet me on my first day, I didn't leave. I picked up a book I saw in the office and taught myself relational databases. Within 3 months, instead of 6, I was promoted to business analyst. I read the autobiography of Malcolm X as a young child, and I too must constantly reinvent myself. At every job, I must prove myself and start from scratch each time. They want me to entertain them with my nigger stories at this Friday chat, and I'm so mad at myself for doing so. I'm mad because I realize after hearing Buckley that I fed their crucial desire, their addiction to care. Now I will share the article that spawned my own. It's a little ways below, but first I'll give you background. The software engineer recently promoted to manager sat in the front passenger seat while my CEO drove us to the French restaurant. I don't think I said anything to start their passionate discussion, but they needed to get it out that white and Asian engineers are equal, but you couldn't find decent minority talent. I sat quietly, like I'd done on the vineyard, silencing my need to interject. Without an adversary, my CEO objected to his own stance. He told us that once there was a very smart, hard-working black girl that he never recognized nor promoted. I remember the heavy silence when he realized I was sitting directly behind him. I was overjoyed in the back seat, knowing I'd be going to Charlotte. That was a cold winter night in upstate New York. In the heat of the summer, that same passenger seat software engineer would challenge me on Friday chat. He would tell me, with the same passion, that I don't care enough if I'm not going to protest like him. I love Jewish people for they identify with our struggle, yet sometimes I see their denial of their white privilege. I told him it's not safe for me to be out there protesting like him, but he couldn't get it. New York City has agreed to pay more than $13 million to settle a civil rights lawsuit brought on behalf of roughly 1,300 people who were arrested or beaten by police during racial injustice demonstrations that swept through the city during the summer of 2020. If approved by a judge, the settlement, which was filed in Manhattan federal court Wednesday, would be among the most expensive payouts ever awarded in a lawsuit over mass arrests, experts said. I suppose they felt these Friday chats to make me discuss what I didn't want to was my care. An Asian girl transitioning to the pronouns he, him was being supported with care. Well, he was very smart and in tune and said what I could never say. I had another Asian friend at my last job, a bestie, who was also capable of seeing me. We'd take extra long lunch breaks on rainy days to sit down for ramen, but she was never at risk for her job. She could understand anything I told her without absorbing my rage. I was even able to tell her about an article I'd read, that Asians received more money on the dollar than other minorities, but their docile nature kept them out of holding real power. Like Jews, they have whiter skin. Unlike any other race, they are synonymous with being intelligent. Say what you want about Chinese communism and Japanese isolationism, the ability to protect your own culture and have roots to it is indispensable. It is history that Black people lack, roots to something other than slavery and George Floyd videos. Baldwin, in a debate against Weiss, says this. He says his name is just something a slave owner gave to him. Is that not what I believe? I have this last name Wright, and I believe that I'm somehow in the right spot living in North Carolina, close to the visionary Wright brothers that invented planes. And yet, I can only imagine that I was a slave of those brothers, or somehow helped them with the plane design and was never credited. It wasn't until I met the Sudanese princess in college that I had any sense of royal connections. The newly Asian man boldly asked the CEO what we're going to do to help the George Floyd cause, besides talking about it. Every company, from Apple to McDonald's, was giving their public support. She asked if we could make a donation, and you know what the CEO said? He said a donation wouldn't really matter because our company, well, his company, isn't big enough to be seen giving the donation. Basically, why do it if no one would know? That's when I felt really horrible for telling them about that time that I'd gone over to say hi to my cousins in the projects and police had apparated from thin air in a raid. I told them this story on the first Friday chat, but I was so drained and regretful afterwards I never told them another. I tried to walk to my car only to hear the threat from a big strong white man in full SWAT gear say, "Bitch, you don't think I'll tase you?" They sat us all down on the pavement in a line in the projects and looked at my face and compared my facial features to my cousins in line and knew we must be family. Then the chief detective, well known to my cousins and the residents as someone not to be fucked with, said, "I can't stand you niggers. I hate you fucking niggers. You all out here on welfare." He didn't see me as cultured at all, and the sting of the situation hurt for weeks. He wrote me a ticket for trespassing because I guess the projects are technically government property. I never was summoned to court for that ticket, but I do remember the over $100 fee causing me stress. Not too long ago, not paying off a remaining $45 fee and missing court had resulted in a warrant for my arrest, and marshals and SWAT cornering me in my third-floor apartment. Luckily, I had reopened the ticket just the day before and used my pretty looks to seduce one of the officers so that I could avoid being arrested, which they said was not even possible. William F. Buckley said, most importantly, that we could not entertain a threat to the current structure of society, especially if it was going to be a violent conflict. He said that the Negro plight was too complex to fix, and that any suggestion to change it was ideological at best. He said that people like Baldwin, and of course myself, are proof that there is opportunity for the black man. But the part that really gets me is he said the only thing white people can do is to care. Buckley's piece, though not as eloquent and easy to follow as the amazingly eloquent Baldwin, made me realize that white folks want to care more than they want to help. I mean, I always knew this, but hearing it from this white man's own mouth made it so obvious. This is the same response to mass shootings, why they keep continuing just like George Floyd events. Rather than changing gun laws, they send prayers. And this is why I've always excelled in history and loved to read, because my mother always told me history repeats itself. This is why she and I never throw away clothes, because bell-bottoms will always come back. The other day, my social influencer daughter rocked a detailed denim piece that I wore next to her when she was 2 and went to take pictures. She said they don't embroider denim like this anymore. She can wear my high school clothes and scour the closets of her grandmom and great aunt to start new trends. And this is why I hate D&I, diversity and inclusion, chiefs of diversity, etc. I've hated them since their birth, and apparently billions of dollars were invested into these programs during George Floyd, only to now see these chiefs, black women, stepping down from major companies, complaining that they have to white-splain, I'm not going to explain what that means, with no power or autonomy. I read an article that finally made sense. It said the CEO has to be the other chief of diversity, for aren't they the ones who set the culture and have power to make change? This CEO agreed with the Jewish protester and incompetent software manager that black talent could not be found. He didn't meet the black engineer I met on the train that introduced a new graphical coding interface he was using at his job to take leaps and bounds beyond what they had. He could not see that for a black person to make it to the level they were at, they had to be more exceptional and persistent than anyone else. They had to figure out VLOOKUPs at the drop of the dime and learn relational databases on their own. I was never heard at that first startup. I told my VP every Friday at our one-on-one that I had to fly out to Michigan soon for the next phase of a VIP project. When I flew out on my own and held it successfully with the top academic scientists from Ivy Leagues and top universities, I came back and was congratulated with dismay. Why hadn't I told him? I taught the white girls hired after me all that I knew, and he loved them now. I used them to handle the busy work so that I could lead the new project, and I'd taken too much power on my own. They celebrated my birthday with cake one Thursday afternoon, and on Monday, Valentine's Day, I was fired before the meeting to present our work. I was relieved, but the disrespect sent me into a nervous breakdown. Valentine's Day? The week before, on my birthday, I'd seen a letter posted on the fridge that was awarding the company I helped build from 80 to 40 people and move into a new building saw me as nothing. The letter awarded them $50,000 for employing a minority that lived in the inner city. That was me, and that was my salary. They'd come even. I'd work at many jobs who received those type of minority grants. An Indian woman-owned company where his mom only came in sometimes and fixed tea. My most recent sales job, the CEO laughed as he proved his Native American status to push a deal through to Native American schools and businesses and created a marketing capabilities one-pager to highlight it. I remember going to the casino and looking at a photo of the board on the wall, surprised to see only one Native American face. They always profit from these sympathetic movements for their own gain. It's always just a plot. Watching Succession, the new tech mogul that aimed to take over told Logan a quip. In ancient Rome, they wanted to make the slaves wear something so they could identify them, like a cloak. Then they decided not to do it because they realized if all slaves dressed the same, they would see how many of them there were, and they'd rise up and kill the masters. My first black teacher, in college, taught us that Martin Luther King was not assassinated because of his civil rights movement. Rather, the greater fear was him speaking out against the Vietnam War. One of the texts was an olive green paperback that was titled something about the Black and Asian Alliance in World War II. The movie Glory and the movie Dead Presidents show us how black men fought in great wars, only to be denied the American dream they thought they'd now be a part of. My black professor taught us about black leaders taking boats to France and traveling and making alliances with Asian people in an international movement. They'd started to build the narrative that it's not just white versus black, but colored versus uncolored or white. Back in the days at Housatonic Community College, my mom had a professor that said a couple of things that always stuck with me. One, he said the Bible is the best-selling book of all time. That always kept me open-minded to the fact that it is a literary piece. And my philosophy teacher in high school, in a 4-person class that I petitioned him to start, taught us that King James had selected which books could be in the Bible, that he dismissed lots of books about angels lest they be thought as powerful as God. When I found a unique version of the Bible and questioned my pastor about it, a chapter called Titus or something with a T, he'd thrown my Bible in the garbage. I took it out. How dare he censor knowledge? 2, he said, what is white culture? Is it not just the absence of every other culture? White people have traveled to every other land and pillaged and raped and violently taken over. What is white food? White rice? And so for Bob Marley and MLK to spread the idea of one love is to put all slaves in the same uniform to recognize their strength and to take over. I realize now it goes beyond race. We're so surprised to see a white person dancing or singing black. Last night I read racist comments and accusations referring to the strike down of affirmative action as unfair to Asian students. The comments were under an Asian man singing his ass off on a black gospel song. Someone wrote vocal appropriation, but I challenge that nothing is appropriation. Everything is just a skill that anyone can work on and become good at. When this Chinese kid started his a cappella audition at college, listening to his headphones and bouncing, we laughed. Then he opened his mouth and reincarnated George Michael singing Faith. These race accusations keep us from wearing the same uniform and identifying our strength. I watched Baldwin's pin drop speech over and over again because he says that black people are like everyone else. He says that our ancestors are both white and black. I'm dark-skinned, but isn't my paternal grandmother high yellow? Is my daughter part Irish? We simply work off the antiquated one-drop rule. He says until we can be seen as helping to build the country, and I think of only recently learning that a black woman invented call waiting and caller ID, and a black man cell phone technology. Not just what I knew for years about George Carver and the damn peanut. Until our efforts are credited in helping build the American dream, the very existence of us will wreck it. And so my hatred of diversity initiatives is very clear to me and haunts me in every position in white corporate America. I remember when I first learned the word diversity. A new chief of diversity was hired at my private school to help me fit in. I already fit in before she came. I was a part of a class that had been in school together since we were 5 years old. We were all raised together and I was the top in all my classes. I did my best to ignore differences and we were equal. It wasn't until the 6th grade well-watch trip that they had an evening powwow and told us that at our age people were in cliques and not to worry. It was that night that everyone clicked up. When the first black adult woman at my school, the new diversity chief, was hired, she started pulling me out of class. I had nothing to talk to this lady about. She was making me stand out more and I hated her for it. I noticed candid pictures were being taken of me by professional photographers outside the science lab. Me and my brother were asked to pose in the courtyard to go in glossy admission brochures to show our school's diversity. So when I got into Tufts and this girl told me it was kind of weird racially, I ignored her. I know how to fit in. When I got the letter over the summer from the Africana Center, I ignored that too. I ignored another invite posted on my dorm door from them. How could I fit in if I separated myself from the get-go? I got called back for the second round of auditions from an all-white a cappella group, and I chose to go to that rather than the black trip to Cape Cod. That was a big mistake. The black people I would meet didn't know me. I tried to correct my mistakes at my first amazing sales position. I commuted 3 hours in a snowstorm that had shut down my state to get to the interview. I ignored them when they asked if I was African at my presentation, and they laughed and said, "What a shame that I wasn't." I shrugged it off and welcomed African software developers that would travel into the company to make them feel wanted, which probably should have been the black woman diversity chief's job. The diversity chief couldn't be trusted. She would report our unhappiness, so she wasn't a part of the secret black Slack channel. We participated in the Coming to America screening after hours on Friday, where our allies got to see a black classic and eat McDonald's in jest. Diversity initiatives are a joke. They don't matter to anyone. When the new COO joined, she said she wanted a more conservative look. She fired all the slackers and all the blacks. I was number 2 on the sales leaderboard and I got fired, just like the black guy who was still in training. How could he have done anything wrong? Though the nanny at my rich friend's house is Jamaican just like my mom when she was a nanny. Though the Puerto Ricans in the cafeteria take the train with me and give me rides home and extra food to feed my family. Though community service projects are done across the street from my house, and the kid who stands up during morning announcements says we can't throw away lunch meat because people in my hometown don't get a pound of food to eat each day. Though I walk in waist-high snow to school and my classmates wave at me from Audis and BMWs. Though I handwrite my papers for years before I get the donation of an old computer. Though the only other black person at my new office is there to empty my trash, I should not be affected because I am proof that blacks have opportunity. Though I am asked if I want gin and juice and micro-racist aggression at the sales conference. Though I have nowhere to live and I have to put in my 2 cents about how my weekend was at the Monday morning meeting, I should be unaffected. George Floyd is most important to share about so that they can show care. I've said this before as a joke, but now I really mean it. You know what real diversity would be? A day off to do my hair since it takes so much longer to do, and not be forced to come on camera or hear comments about how my style has changed. Real diversity would be time off to attend to my kid and not have her get jumped on the school bus because I had to sit in a meeting that went past work hours. Real diversity would be having the option to really not go to that Friday chat or events at the bar because I had to take a train for 3 hours after that. Real diversity would be not having my new Mormon manager deny the work from home days I'd earned and to dock me for being late to her new morning meetings because she'd never even been on a subway. Real diversity is not caring about what I've white-splained. Real diversity is not pontificating or quote-unquote caring about the major racial issues of the world, but actually caring about me. The crisis of leadership in the white community is remarkable and terrifying because there is, in fact, no white community. James Baldwin. I wasn't going to read this out loud, even though I wanted to. But then I saw that he wrote it on the year I was born, so it seems important. On Being White and Otherwise, James Baldwin. The crisis of leadership in the white community is remarkable and terrifying because there is, in fact, no white community. This may seem an enormous statement, and it is. I'm willing to be challenged. I'm also willing to attempt to spell it out. My frame of reference is, of course, America, or that portion of the North American continent that calls itself America. And this means I am speaking essentially of the European vision of the world, or more precisely, perhaps the European vision of the universe. It is a vision as remarkable for what it pretends to include as for what it remorsefully diminishes, demolishes, or leaves totally out of account. There is, for example, at least in principle, an Irish community, here, there, anywhere, or more precisely, Belfast, Dublin, and Boston. There is a German community, both sides of Berlin, Bavaria, and Yorkville. There is an Italian community, Rome, Naples, the Bank of the Holy Ghost, and Mulberry Street. And there is a Jewish community, stretching from Jerusalem to California to New York. There are English communities, there are French communities, there are Swiss consortiums. There are Poles in Warsaw where they would like us to be friends, and in Chicago, where because they are white, we are enemies. There are, for that matter, Indian restaurants and Turkish baths. There is the underworld. The poor, to say nothing of those who intend to become rich, are always with us, but this does not describe a community. It bears terrifying witness to what happened to everyone who got here and paid the price of the ticket. The price was to become white. No one was white before he or she came to America. It took generations and a vast amount of coercion before this became a white country. It is probable that it is the Jewish community, or more accurately, perhaps its remnants, that in America has paid the highest and most extraordinary price for becoming white. For the Jews came here from countries where they were not white, and they came here in part because they were not white, and incontestably in the eyes of the Black American, and not only in those eyes, American Jews have opted to become white, and this is how they operate. It was ironical to hear, for example, former Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin declare some time ago that the Jewish people bow only to God, while knowing that the state of Israel is sustained by a blank check from Washington. Without further pursuing the implication of this mutual act of faith, one is nevertheless aware that the Black presence here can scarcely hope, at least not yet, to halt the slaughter in South Africa. And there is a reason for that. America became white. The people who, as they claim, settled the country became white because of the necessity of denying the Black presence and justifying the Black subjugation. No community can be based on such a principle, or in other words, no community can be established on so genocidal a lie. White men, from Norway for example, where they were Norwegians, became white by slaughtering the cattle, poisoning the wells, torturing the houses, massacring Native Americans, raping Black women. This moral erosion has made it quite impossible for those who think of themselves as white in this country to have any moral authority at all, privately or publicly. The multitudinous bulk of them sit, stunned, before their TV sets, swallowing garbage that they know to be garbage, and in a profound and unconscious effort to justify this torpor that disguises a profound and bitter panic, pay a vast amount of attention to athletics, even though they know that the football player, the son of the Republic, their sons, is merely another aspect of the money-making scheme. They are either relieved or embittered by the presence of the Black boy on the team. I do not know if they remember how long and hard they fought to keep him off it. I know that they do not dare have any notion of the price Black people, mothers and fathers, paid and pay. They do not want to know the meaning or face the shame of what they compelled out of what they took as a necessity of being white, Joe Louis or Jackie Robinson or Cassius Clay, aka Muhammad Ali, to pay. I know that they themselves would not have liked to pay it. There has never been a labor movement in this country, the proof being the absence of a Black presence in the so-called father-son unions. There are perhaps some niggers in the window, but Blacks have no power in the labor unions. Just so does the white community, as a means of keeping itself white, elect, as they imagine, their political representatives. No nation in the world, including England, is represented by so stunning a pantheon of the relentlessly mediocre. I will not name names. I will leave that to you. But this cowardice, this necessity of justifying a totally false identity, and of justifying what must be called a genocidal history, has placed everyone now living into the hands of the most ignorant and powerful people the world has ever seen. And how did they get that way? By deciding that they were white, by opting for safety instead of life, by persuading themselves that a Black child's life meant nothing compared with a white child's life, by abandoning their children to the things white men could buy, by informing their children that Black women, Black men, and Black children had no human integrity, that those who call themselves white were bound to respect. And in this debasement and definition of Black people, they debased and defamed themselves, and have brought humanity to the edge of oblivion, because they think they are white. Because they think they are white, they do not dare confront the ravage and the lie of their history. Because they think they are white, they cannot allow themselves to be tormented by the suspicion that all men are brothers. Because they think they are white, they are looking for, or bombing into existence, stable populations, cheerful natives, and cheap labor. Because they think they are white, they believe, as even no child believes, in the dream of safety. Because they think they are white, however vociferous they may be, and however multitudinous, they are as speechless as Lot's wife, looking backward, changing into a pillar of salt. However, white being absolutely a moral choice, where there are no white people. The crisis of leadership for those of us whose identity has been forged or branded as black is nothing new. We, who were not black before we got here either, who were defined as black by the slave trade, have paid for the crisis of leadership in the white community for a very long time, and have resoundingly, even when we faced the worst about ourselves, survived and triumphed over it. If we had not survived and triumphed, there would not be a black American alive. And the fact that we are still here, even in suffering, darkness, danger, endlessly defined by those who do not dare define, or even confront themselves, is the key to the crisis in white leadership. The past informs us of the various kinds of people, criminals, adventurers, and saints, to say nothing, of course, of popes, but it is the black condition, and only that, which informs us concerning white people. It is a terrible paradox, but those who believed that they could control and define black people divested themselves of the power to control and define themselves.
What is relevant about this is that whereas 40 years ago when I was born, the question of having to deal with what is unspoken by the subjugated, what is never said to the master, of having to deal with this reality was a very remote possibility. It was in no one's mind. When I was growing up, I was taught in American history books that Africa had no history, and neither did I. That I was a savage, about whom the less said the better, who had been saved by Europe and brought to America. And of course, I believed it. I didn't have much choice. Those are the only books there were. Everyone else seemed to agree. If you walk out of Harlem, ride out of Harlem, downtown, the world agrees. What you see is much bigger, cleaner, whiter, richer, safer than where you are. They collect the garbage. People obviously can pay their life insurance. The children look happy. Say, you're not. And you go back home. And it would seem then, of course, that it's an act of God, that this is true, that you belong where white people have put you. It is only since the Second World War that there's been a counter-image in the world, and that image not come about through any legislation on the part of any American government, but through the fact that Africa was suddenly on the stage of the world, and the Africans had to be dealt with in a way that had never been dealt with before. This gave an American Negro for the first time a sense of himself beyond a savage or a clown. It has created, and will create, a great many conundrums. One of the great things that the white world does not know, but I think I do know, is that black people are just like everybody else. One has used the myth of Negro and the myth of color to pretend and to assume that you are dealing essentially with something exotic, bizarre, and practically, according to human laws, unknown. Alas, it is not true. We are also mercenaries, dictators, murderers, liars. We are human too. What is crucial here is that unless we can manage to establish some kind of dialogue between those people whom I pretend has paid for the American dream and those other people who have not achieved it, we will be in terrible trouble. I want to say at the end, at the last, is that is what concerns me most. We are sitting in this room, and we are all, at least we like to think we are, relatively civilized. And we can talk to each other, at least on certain levels. So that we could walk out of here assuming that the measure of our enlightenment, or at least our politeness, has some effect on the world. It may not. I remember, for example, when the ex-Attorney General, Mr. Robert Kennedy, said that it was conceivable that in 40 years in America we might have a Negro president. And that sounded like a very emancipated statement, I suppose, to white people. They were not in Harlem when this statement was first heard, and did not hear, and possibly will never hear, the laughter and the bitterness and the scorn with which the statement was greeted. From the point of view of the man in the Harlem barbershop, Bobby Kennedy only got here yesterday. And now he's already on his way to the presidency. We've been here for 400 years, and now he tells us that maybe in 40 years, if you're good, we may let you become president. What is dangerous here is the turning away from anything any white American says. The reason for the political hesitation in spite of the Johnson landslide is the one that's been betrayed by American politicians for so long. And I am a grown man, and perhaps I can be reasoned with. I certainly hope I can be. But I don't know, and neither does Martin Luther King, none of us know how to deal with those other people whom the white world has so long ignored, who don't believe anything the white world says, and don't entirely believe anything I or Martin say. And one can't blame them. You watch what has happened to them in less than 20 years. It seems to me that the city of New York, for example, this is my last point, which had Negroes in it for a very long time. If the city of New York were able, as it has indeed been able, in the last 15 years to reconstruct itself, tear down buildings and raise great new ones, downtown and for money, and has done nothing whatever except build housing projects in the ghetto for the Negroes. And of course the Negroes hate it. Presently the property does indeed deteriorate because the children cannot bear it. They want to get out of the ghetto. If the American pretensions were based on more solid, a more honest assessment of life and of themselves, it would not mean for Negroes, when someone says urban renewal, that Negroes simply going to be thrown out into the streets, which is what it does mean now. This is not an act of God. We're dealing with a society made and ruled by men. If the American Negro had not been present in America, I am convinced that the history of the American labor movement would be much more edifying than it is. It is a terrible thing for an entire people to surrender to the notion that 1/9 of its population is beneath them. And until that moment, until the moment comes when we, the American people, are able to accept the fact that I have to accept, for example, that my ancestors are both white and black, that on that continent we are trying to forge a new identity for which we need each other, and that I am not a ward of America. I am not an object of missionary charity. I am one of the people who built the country. Until this moment, there is scarcely any hope for the American dream, because the people who are denied participation in it, by their very presence, will wreck it. And if that happens, it's a very grave moment for the West. Thank you.